Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us for Sutta study with Bhante Suddhaso. So today we'll be looking at Majjhima Nikaya 22, the Simile of the Viper. So if you'd like to follow along with Bhante Suddhaso's translation, you can click the link in the live chat. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them in, and Bhante will address them at the end of the talk. So good morning so far to Jens, Gita and Yana, Poonam, and Michael, and Elaine. Good to see you all and everyone else who's watching behind the scenes. So at this time, I'll pass things over to Bhante Suddhaso, who will guide us in some sutta study.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. So welcome back to Sutta study. Today we'll be looking at the Alagaddūpama Sutta, the Simile of the Viper. So Majjhima Nikaya number 22. This is a relatively well-known sutta, though not for the simile given in the title, but rather for another simile contained within the sutta, the simile of the raft, which is commonly taken out of the context of the sutta and used for other purposes. So on this day, we'll try to get through the whole sutta. It's a relatively long sutta, so I'll talk fast. And explanations may be a little bit briefer than you're used to. So please feel free to type in questions and comments if you want clarification on anything. So I'll go ahead and start reading through the sutta and give some explanations as we go along. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi at Jeta's Grove in Anattā Park. On that occasion, there was a monk named Aritta, who had previously been a vulture trapper, and in whom a harmful opinion had arisen to this effect. As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, those things which are spoken of by the Blessed One as obstructive are not obstructive for one who indulges in them. So this, you can already get a sense of the harmfulness of this view. So he's already saying, like, what the Buddha says is an obstacle to awakening, he says is not actually an obstacle. And the implication later in the sutta is that he's specifically talking about sensuality. He's specifically saying that even though the Buddha says that sensuality is an obstacle to awakening, there's actually nothing wrong with indulging in sensuality. It won't impede your progress. So that's what the monk Aritta was saying. So the sutta continues, many monks heard. Apparently there's a monk named Aritta who was previously a vulture trapper, and in whom a harmful opinion has arisen to this effect. As above, repeating Aritta's viewpoint. Then those monks approached Venerable Aritta and said to him, Venerable Aritta, is it true that a harmful opinion has arisen in you to this effect? And they repeat what was heard about his opinions. Fortunately, he was honest. He says, yes, Venerables, as I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, those things which are spoken of by the Blessed One as obstructive are not obstructive for one who indulges in them. Then those monks, wishing to separate the monk Aritta from that harmful opinion, enjoined, pressured, and entreated him. Venerable Aritta, do not speak in that way. Do not slander the Blessed One. It is not good to slander the Blessed One. It is not good to speak about the Blessed One in that way. So this is a running theme that we find in the suttas, by the way, is that it's very bad karma to misrepresent the Dhamma, especially to do so intentionally. So it's something which we should really try to avoid. We should try to always present the Dhamma as accurately and precisely as we can. So they continue saying, Venerable Aritta, in many ways, obstructive things have been spoken about by the Blessed One as obstructive. They are obstructive for one who indulges in them. Sensuality has been spoken about by the Blessed One as bringing little gratification, much suffering, and much anguish. The drawback here is greater than the gratification. Sensuality has been spoken about by the Blessed One using the simile of the skeleton, the simile of the piece of meat, the simile of the charcoal pit, the simile of the dream, the simile of the borrower, the simile of the tree fruit, the simile of the chopping block, the simile of the spear, and the simile of the serpent's head. It brings much suffering and much anguish. The drawback here is greater than the gratification. So this is referring to a number of different similes that the Buddha used to speak about the dangers and drawbacks of obsessing with sensuality. And I'm not going to go into detailed descriptions of each of these similes. Suffice to say that you'll find all of them elsewhere in the suttas. So since all of you are currently in the process of reading through the suttas cover to cover, you'll find all of these similes on your own sooner or later. Some of them are quite evocative, but you'll have to find them on your own. If you want to cheat, Bhikkhu Bodhi lists the exact reference for each one of these, if I recall correctly. So the sutta continues. But although the monk Aritta was enjoined, pressured, and entreated in this way by those monks, he still stubbornly held on to and professed that harmful opinion. As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, those things which are spoken of by the Blessed One as obstructive are not obstructive for one who indulges in them. When those monks were not able to separate the monk Aritta from that harmful opinion, they approached the Blessed One, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. While they were seated to one side, those monks said to the Blessed One, Bhante, a harmful opinion has arisen in a monk named Aritta to this effect. As above, and they explain how they went to Aritta and tried to convince him otherwise and were unsuccessful. So then the Blessed One said to a certain monk, Go, monk, and summon the monk Aritta using my words. Venerable Aritta, the teacher summons you. So that should strike deadly fear in the heart of any monk. So yes, Bhante, that monk replied to the Blessed One. He went to the monk Aritta and said to him, Venerable Aritta, the teacher summons you. You're in trouble. Yes, Venerable, the monk Aritta replied to that monk. He approached the Blessed One, paid respects, and sat to one side. When the monk Aritta was seated to one side, the Blessed One said to him, Aritta, is it true that a harmful opinion has arisen in you to this effect? As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Blessed One, those things which are spoken of by the Blessed One as obstructive are not obstructive for one who indulges in them. And he replies, yes, Bhante. And the Buddha says, you foolish man, how could you understand in that way the Dhamma taught by me? Foolish man, isn't it true that in many ways obstructive things have been spoken about me as obstructive? They are obstructive for one who indulges in them. Sensuality has been spoken about by me as bringing little gratification, much suffering, and much anguish. The drawback here is greater than the gratification. And he gives, again, the list of the same similes. So the simile of the skeleton, the piece of meat, the charcoal pit, the dream, the borrower, the tree fruit, the chopping block, the spear, and the serpent's head. And he says, then you, foolish man, slander me with your bad grasp of the teaching. You ruin yourself and accumulate much demerit. Foolish man, this will be for your long-term detriment and suffering. Then the Blessed One addressed the monks. What do you think, monks? Has this monk Aritta produced even a spark of wisdom in this Dhamma Vinaya? And the monks reply, how could that be, Bhante? Certainly not, Bhante. So not only does the Buddha directly scold the monk Aritta, but then he also publicly shames Aritta in front of the community of monks and gets all the other monks to point out that they also recognize the shortcomings and failings of Aritta's standpoint. And the sutta continues, when this was said, the monk Aritta became silent and ashamed, and he sat with shoulders slumped and face downcast, sulky and unresponsive. I kind of don't blame him. This would have been pretty embarrassing and disappointing. Knowing that the monk Aritta was silent and ashamed, sitting with his shoulders slumped and face downcast, sulky and unresponsive, the Blessed One said to him, "Foolish man, you will be known by your own harmful opinion. I will question the monks about this." So in my mind, at this point, the Buddha's tone shifts. And the Buddha here is demonstrating his compassion of walking through an understanding of how one can relate to what the Buddha speaks to as obstructions, why the Buddha relates to sensuality as obstruction. So he asks, the Blessed One addressed the monks. Monks, do you understand the Dhamma taught by me in the same way that the monk Aritta does when he slanders me with his bad grasp of the teaching, ruining himself and accumulating much demerit? And the other monks reply, certainly not, Bhante. Bhante, in many ways, obstructive things have been spoken about by the Blessed One as obstructive. The drawback here is greater than the gratification. And the Buddha says, good, monks. Monks, it is good that you understand in this way the Dhamma taught by me. Monks, in many ways, obstructive things have been spoken about me as obstructive, etc. Then this monk Aritta slanders me with his bad grasp of the teaching, ruining himself and accumulating much demerit. That will be for this foolish man's long-term detriment and suffering. Monks, it is not possible for one to indulge in sensuality without sensual desires, sensual perceptions, and sensual thoughts. So in other words, if your mind isn't filled with sensual desires, perceptions, and thoughts, then you're not going to perform any physical acts of indulgence in sensuality. So one who has a pure mind is not going to engage in any kind of sensuality. The implication here, by the way, also is that if one is engaging in physical acts of sensuality, that is increasing or strengthening the sensual thoughts and desires in one's mind, which then, again, pulls one away from mental purification. So next, the Buddha goes into the central simile of the sutta, the simile of the viper. So the Buddha says, monks, here's some foolish person. Oh, let me see this. Interesting. Slight error. It doesn't actually. No, it does say foolish person. Yeah. Yeah, it says, monks, here's some foolish person learns the Dhamma. Discourses, poems, explanations, verses, exclamations, reports, birth stories, wonders, and discussions. Just a interesting side point. This appears to be the way that the suttas were categorized at the time of the Buddha. So these days, we categorize them as Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, and Khuddaka Nikaya. But at the time of the Buddha, it was categorized instead into these 9 categories: discourses, poems, explanations, verses, exclamations, reports, birth stories, wonders, and discussions. So that's a minor and interesting point. But as far as I'm aware, no scholar has been able to piece together what would fit into each of these categories, except where it's really obvious. So nobody's, as far as I know, nobody's reconstructed this 9-part division of the suttas. So if any of you have heard otherwise, please let me know. I would find that interesting. So he says, having learned the Dhamma, he does not wisely examine its meaning. Since the meaning of those teachings have not been wisely examined by him, they are not accepted by him. So acceptance here means a deep internal recognition of the truth of something. So he says, since they've not been wisely examined by him, they are not accepted by him. He just learns the Dhamma so he can argue, so he can refute other people's statements. He learns the Dhamma, but he does not manifest its benefit. His bad grasp of the teachings leads to his long-term detriment and suffering. For what reason? Monks, because of the bad grasp of the teachings. So this is the case of somebody who they learn the Dhamma, but not out of deep faith in the Buddha's awakening, not out of a sincere aspiration for their own awakening, not out of a wish to embody the teachings, not out of a wish to live in accordance with the teachings, but rather out of a wish to accumulate intellectual information with which to argue with other people and to try to win at debates with other people. So this is actually the case in much of the world of academia. So there's a lot of scholars and academics who can discourse at length about Buddhism and engage in learned arguments and debates about Buddhism. Yet they don't actually practice Buddhism, and they don't even necessarily have any faith in the possibility of enlightenment. So that's the kind of person the Buddha is talking about here. And even some practitioners are like this. They study the teachings, but they don't really believe in enlightenment. They're maybe trying to be 10% happier, which, okay, fair enough. Everyone wants to be a little bit happier. I guess that's fine. But they're not using the benefit. They're not using the teachings to their maximum benefit. They're just kind of scraping away the toenails of the Buddha and completely missing the opportunity to inherit the entire body and mind of the Buddha. So the Buddha then says, monks, imagine that a man needed a viper, was seeking a viper, was going about searching for a viper. He might see a large viper and grab it by its body or tail. Then that viper would curl around and bite his hand or arm or one of his other limbs. Because of that, he would die or experience death-like pain. For what reason? Monks, because of the bad grasp of the viper. In the same way, monks, here some foolish man learns the Dhamma, and he repeats as before, so learning it just for the sake of arguing and debating. And it says, his bad grasp of the teachings leads to his long-term detriment and suffering. For what reason? Because of the bad grasp of the teachings. So again, this is the case of somebody who they pick up the Dhamma not for the sake of enlightenment, but rather for the sake of winning in arguments and debates, or maybe for the sake of intellectual curiosity, or maybe to have a sense of knowing, a sense of knowledge. And the Buddha says this is, it's not only useless, it's actually harmful. It's not of benefit. Then he says, monks, here some gentleman learns the Dhamma, discourses, poems, explanations, verses, exclamations, reports, birth stories, wonders, and discussions. Having learned the Dhamma, he wisely examines its meaning. Since the meaning of those teachings has been wisely examined by him, they are accepted by him. So in other words, one learns the Dhamma, but learns it not just as intellectual information. One learns it and carefully examines it. So wisely examines it. So comparing the teachings to one's own experience, seeing the truth of the teachings in one's own life, in one's own mind. And in this way, one comes to accept the truth of those teachings. So coming to this deep bedrock realization that the Buddha knew what he was talking about, that the Dhamma actually is an accurate reflection of reality, an accurate presentation of the way things are. And that by living in accordance with the Dhamma, we can come to the same awakening that the Buddha came to. So the Sutta continues, it says, he does not learn the Dhamma just so he can argue, nor just so he can refute other people's statements. By the way, there might still be some arguing and refuting other people's statements going on, but that's not the purpose of learning the Dhamma. But it does sometimes come up. If somebody comes to me and says, oh, karma and rebirth are not important in Buddhism, well, of course I'm going to argue with them and refute their opinions because they're wrong. But that's not why I learned the Dhamma. I didn't learn the Dhamma in order to win at debates. I learned the Dhamma so that I could inherit the mind of the Buddha. So there might still be some arguing and debating going on, but that's not why we're learning the Dhamma. So it says, he learns the Dhamma and manifests its benefit. His good grasp of the teachings leads to his long-term benefit and happiness. For what reason? Monks, because of the good grasp of the teachings. And then again, he gives the simile of the viper. He says, monks, Imagine that a man needed a viper, was seeking a viper, was going about searching for a viper. He might see a large viper and pin it down well using a forked stick. Having pinned it down well using a forked stick, he would grasp it well by the neck. Monks, even though that snake might wrap its body around his hand or arm or one of his other limbs, he would not die or experience death-like pain because of that. For what reason? Monks, because of the good grasp of the viper. This then is this description of, it's actually analogizing the Dhamma to being like a poisonous snake, which is very interesting. So normally the Dhamma is analogized to things which are inherently safe and good and beneficial. But in the sutta, the Buddha is analogizing the Dhamma to a poisonous snake and saying that if you pick up a poisonous snake in the wrong way, then it's going to bite you and poison you. And that's going to be a disaster. But if you pick it up in the right way, then you'll be safe. So in the same way, if we pick up the Dhamma just for the sake of accumulating intellectual information and then arguing with other people about it, in that case, the Dhamma is actually dangerous to us. In that case, our misuse and misapplication of the Dhamma can actually lead to the destruction of our own faith and confidence in the Dhamma, and the destruction of the faith and confidence in the Dhamma of other people. So it's not leading to benefit either for ourselves or others. And in fact, we may be leading ourselves and others away from a true understanding of the teachings. So in this way, it's harmful, it's dangerous. But it's only dangerous because of our own bad grasp, because of our own misunderstanding and misuse of the teachings. So in the case of Venerable Aritta, this seems to be what the Buddha is implying happened, is that Venerable Aritta picked up the Dhamma and was looking at it from an intellectual standpoint, and in so doing managed to actually convince himself of something which was untrue. And there's many examples of this. If you look at contemporary Buddhist teachers, there's many examples of people who look at the Dhamma and then manage to convince themselves of things which are clearly in contradiction to what the Buddha taught. And then they go about parading that about as their central teaching, saying that they've discovered the true meaning of the Dhamma. And in so doing, they lead other people away from the Dhamma. An example of this, and I'm not going to name names, but an example of this is there's one person who claims to be an arhat. And of course, in the suttas, it states that an arhat has no sexual lust. And this person says, well, I'm an arhat and I have sexual lust. Therefore, the suttas must be wrong on this point. So he goes around telling the world that he's an arhat and that arhats still have sexual lust, and that sexual lust is not in any way an obstacle or an impediment to enlightenment. So actually not terribly different from what Aritta was saying, where Aritta was saying that what the Buddha spoke about as obstructive is not actually obstructive. And again, the sutta makes it clear this is talking about sensuality. So we have our own modern day Aritta going around these days, claiming to be an arhat and saying that arhats can still be sexual. So then the Buddha says, therefore, monks, understand the meaning of what I have said and remember it accordingly. And if you do not understand the meaning of what I have said, you should discuss it with me or with one of the other competent monks. This is a very important statement. At first glance, it might not seem important, but it's actually very important. So first, the Buddha says, understand the meaning of what I have said and remember it accordingly. In other words, make a sincere effort to understand the meaning of the Dhamma and to always hold the meaning of the Dhamma in mind. But more importantly, then, he says, if you don't understand something, discuss it with other competent monks. Go to respected monks, senior monks, wise monks, learned monks, competent monks, and ask them. Ask them what their understanding of the Dhamma is. You don't necessarily need to believe them automatically, but inquire, ask questions, discuss, and always seriously consider the possibility that your own viewpoints might be wrong. In fact, if you're not enlightened yet, that pretty much guarantees that your viewpoints are wrong on some point. So we should always be willing to accept the possibility that we've got something a little bit wrong, that our understanding of the Dhamma might be a little bit off. So having the humility to go and talk to other practitioners and ask, well, what do you think about this? How do you understand these aspects of the Dhamma? And then the Buddha gets into the famous simile of the raft. So the Buddha says, monks, I will teach you how the Dhamma is like a raft. It is to be used for the sake of escaping, not for the sake of grasping. Listen to this and carefully pay attention. I will speak. Yes, Bhante, those monks replied to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said this, monks, imagine that a person was traveling on a road. He might see a large river, the near shore of which is risky and dangerous, and the far shore of which is safe and harmless. But there is no ferry boat or bridge or any other way to cross. He would think, the near shore of this large river is risky and dangerous, and the far shore is safe and harmless. But there is no ferry boat or bridge or any other way to cross. Perhaps I will gather grass and wood and branches and leaves, bind them together into a raft, and then, relying on that raft, I will make an effort with my arms and legs to cross safely to the other side. Then amongst that person gathered grass and wood and branches and leaves, bound them together into a raft, and relying on that raft, made an effort with his arms and legs to cross safely to the other side. When he reached the other side, he would think, this raft has done much for me. Relying on this raft and making an effort with my arms and legs, I crossed safely to the other side. Perhaps I will put this raft on my head or carry it on my shoulders as I go about doing what I wish to do. What do you think, monks? Is this person doing what should be done with that raft? And the monks reply, certainly not, Bhante. The Buddha says, monks, how could this person do what should be done with that raft? Here, monks, when he reaches the other side, he would think, this raft has done much for me. Relying on this raft and making an effort with my arms and legs, I cross safely to the other side. Perhaps I will leave it on the ground or floating in the water as I go about doing what I wish to do. Monks, this person is doing what should be done with that raft. In the same way, monks, I have taught you how the Dhamma is like a raft. It is for the purpose of escaping, not for the purpose of grasping. Monks, I have taught you how the Dhamma is like a raft. Those who understand this are to let go even of Dhamma, let alone non-Dhamma. So this needs a bit of explanation because, as I mentioned at the start, the simile often gets taken out of the sutta and misapplied, used incorrectly. So often people use this to say that this means that we shouldn't grasp the teachings, we shouldn't hold on to the teachings, we shouldn't be attached to the Dhamma. And then they use that to justify doing all kinds of unwholesome, obstructive things. But if you look at this sutta, the simile in this sutta, so the person is in danger. They want to cross over to safety. So they put together a raft using whatever junk they can find lying around on the side of the river. They put together a raft. And then relying on that raft and making effort, they cross over the river. And only when they get safely to the other side of the river, only then do they leave behind the raft. In other words, we do need to let go of the Dhamma, but not until we're fully enlightened. When you're in the middle of the river, you're still relying on the raft, depending on the raft. You still need the raft. When you're in the middle of the river, you're still using the raft as the platform from which you make effort to cross over to safety. So people who say, oh, just let go of the Dhamma, you're too attached to the Dhamma. That's like telling somebody who's in the middle of the river, oh, just let go of the raft. You're too attached to the raft. They'll be like, you're crazy. I'm not letting go of this raft. This is the only thing that's keeping me safe. The only chance I have for crossing the river. Why would I let go of it now? That would be foolish. And the truth is that once you've reached the far shore, which symbolizes enlightenment, so throughout the suttas, the far shore symbolizes nirvana, awakening, full enlightenment. When you reach the far shore, then letting go of the raft happens naturally. There's no problem there. There's no struggle. There's no question in your mind what you should do. Naturally, you let go of everything. But that's after you've safely crossed over. So it must be understood, this simile is not saying that we should let go of the Dhamma at any point prior to enlightenment. And at the point of enlightenment, it happens naturally. And interestingly enough, it's also quite clear in the suttas that an awakened being always acts in accordance with Dhamma. So they let go of the Dhamma because at that point it's been completely internalized. So their behavior is naturally in line with Dhamma. They no longer need to make an effort to practice Dhamma. It's effortless. Their life is a manifestation of Dhamma. Their body and mind are a manifestation of Dhamma. So it no longer takes effort. Then the Buddha continues, introducing another way of approaching the teachings. He says, monks, there are 6 standpoints of wrong view. What 6? Here, monks, an uneducated commoner, so that's asuttava patujana, an uneducated commoner, one who does not see the noble ones, has not mastered the teachings of the noble ones, is undisciplined in the teachings of the noble ones. Noble ones means those who have attained some stage of awakening. One who does not see good people, has not mastered their teachings, and is undisciplined in their teachings. So such a person sees the body as this is me, I am this is myself. Sees identification as this is me, I am this is myself. Sees mental objects as this is me, I am this is myself. It sees whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, attained, sought after, or explored with the mind as this is me, I am this is myself. So these are all ways of basing a sense of self upon one's body, one's mind, one's sensory experiences, what one thinks. And then finally, he says, or based on this view, the world is the self. And after death, I will be permanent, stable, eternal, unchanging, and will remain that way forever. He sees that as this is me, I am this is myself. So an example of this last one is a friend of a friend, someone who I'm acquainted with. And at one point, we were having a conversation, and this person started saying how he has this belief that he has this spiritual essence within him, and that when his body dies, the spiritual essence will just merge back into the universe. So in that sense, he's never actually really going to die. His essence is just going to merge back with the rest of the universe. So he'll exist forever as part of the essence of the universe. And he said, it just made this up one day because it felt right to him. And it's like, well, that's all very cute, but no. So this is what the Buddha is singling out, or one example of this perspective of identifying oneself with the world. So thinking, I am the universe. I am an inseparable part of the universe, and it has always been that way, and it will always be that way. So I'm never really going to die. I'm just part of the universe. That also is just another way of identifying as something or some object. So all of these views of self are tying a sense of self to some distinct sankhara, some distinct thing or object or phenomenon, which is a tremendous mistake because all sankharas are impermanent, subject to arising and vanishing, subject to coming and going, shifting and changing. So we can't possibly be any one of those. But then the Buddha says, monks, an educated disciple of the noble ones, that's Suttava Arya Savaka, educated disciple of the noble ones. One who sees the noble ones has mastered their teachings, is well disciplined in their teachings. Who sees good people has mastered their teachings and is well disciplined in their teachings. Does not see the body as this is me, I am this is myself. Same does not see identification, mental objects, whatever is seen, heard, sensed, cognized, attained, sought after, explored with the mind, and does not have the view the world is the self, and so on. And the Buddha says, seeing in this way, he is not agitated about what does not exist. In other words, when one clearly sees that absolutely nothing within all of reality can be identified as me or mine or myself, then one is not agitated. Because one recognizes that there is nothing which is me, and therefore nothing we need to defend, nothing we need to be worried about or concerned about. So this is what it means. He is not agitated about what does not exist. So if you think, I am this body, then you will be agitated about what happens to this body. Because you think there is an existing self which is connected to this body or defined as this body. So you'll be agitated about what happens to this body because you think it's me. But when you recognize that nothing whatsoever is me, then there's no basis for agitation. There's no basis for concern. There's no basis for fear. No basis for worry. So then a monk says, so it says, when this was said, a certain monk asked the Blessed One, Bhante, can there be agitation about something external that does not exist? So in other words, this monk is noticing the examples the Buddha gives are all internal. They're about one's own body and mind. So this monk says, well, what about something external? Can there be agitation about something external that does not exist? And the Buddha says, there can be, monk. Said the Blessed One, here a monk thinks about something. Oh, it was mine, but now it is not. Oh, it could be mine, but I will not get it. He sorrows, frets, and laments, beating his chest and wailing, and becomes confused. Monk, in this way, there is agitation about something external that does not exist. This might sound familiar. This actually, to me, it sounds like a broke teenager. Oh, it was mine, but now it is not. I lost that nice thing that I had. Oh, how sad. It could be mine, but I will not get it. Oh, how sad. I want those things, but I can't afford them, or they're not available to me. It's not an option. Oh, woe is me. So it's this lamentation about something which we don't actually have. It's just an idea. And it's based upon the wrong belief that if we get what we want, then we'll be happy. So then the monk asked the Buddha, Bhante, can there be no agitation about something external that does not exist? And the Buddha says, there can be, monk. Said the Blessed One, here a monk does not think about something. Oh, it was mine, but now it is not. Oh, it could be mine, but I will not get it. He does not sorrow, fret, lament, beat his chest, wail, or become confused. Monk, in this way, there is no agitation about something external that does not exist. In other words, if you don't have something, well, then don't make a problem out of not having that. Be content with the way things are. There's no problem. Then the monk asks, Bhante, can there be agitation about something internal that does not exist? So it's actually what the Buddha was speaking about earlier, but the monk is maybe asking for more examples. And the Buddha says, there can be, monk, said the Blessed One. Here a monk has this opinion. The world is the self, and after death I will be permanent, stable, eternal, unchanging, and will remain that way forever. So the same viewpoint the Buddha had mentioned earlier. He hears the Dhamma being taught by the Tathagata, or one of the Tathagata's disciples, for the complete uprooting of the tendency of settling on, obsessing with, and sticking to any viewpoint, for the pacification of all formations, for the relinquishment of all acquisitions, for the elimination of craving, for dispassion, for cessation, for enlightenment. So when I hear that, I get really uplifted and joyful and excited. I'm like, this sounds great. Give me some of that. The pacification of all formations, sign me up. But the person who has a view of permanent, eternal self-existence hears something like this, they're actually really disturbed. So the sutta says, it occurs to him, it seems I will be cut off. It seems I will be destroyed. It seems I will be lost. He sorrows, frets, and laments, beating his chest and wailing, and becomes confused. Monk, in this way, there is agitation about something internal that does not exist. In other words, this person thinks, I exist, but these Buddhist monks are saying that everything is subject to cessation. So that means that I will cease to exist. So the person gets agitated because they think that there is a stable self, which is then going to cease to exist. But there's actually no stable self in the first place. There's no self which can cease. There's no self at all. So the person is agitated about a figment of their own imagination, worried that they're going to lose something that they don't even currently have. So then the monk asks, Bhante, can there be no agitation about something internal that does not exist? And the Buddha says, there can be, monk. And again, it's somebody who doesn't have that viewpoint, who doesn't have the viewpoint, the world is the self. So then when they hear the teachings of the Buddha, they're not disturbed. It's no problem for them. Then the Buddha says, monks, you could possess something which is permanent, stable, eternal, unchanging, and which will remain that way forever. Monks, do you see anything which is permanent, stable, eternal, unchanging, and which will remain that way forever? And they say, certainly not, Bhante. He says, good, monks. Monks, I also do not see anything which is permanent, stable, eternal, unchanging, and which will remain that way forever. So this is an interesting point. The Buddha is saying that possession is only possible of something which is permanent and stable. In other words, if you think you own something, but then it changes or disappears, then apparently you didn't own it in the first place. Earlier he mentions the simile of the borrower. This is actually exactly what that simile is talking about. We think we own our possessions, but we're actually only borrowing them for a period of time. We think own our experiences, but we're only borrowing those sensations for a short period of time. So in the same way, we don't really own anything. We're just borrowing a temporary experience. So then the Buddha says, monks, you could cling to a belief in self-existence, which, when clung to, does not produce sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and anguish. Monks, do you see any belief in self-existence, which, when clung to, does not produce sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and anguish? They say, certainly not, Bhante. The Buddha says, good, monks, I also do not see this. So similarly here, he's saying that if there was some belief in self-existence which did not produce suffering, then that would be the kind of belief in self-existence that was worth having. But there is no such thing. Any belief in self-existence inevitably results in dukkha. So there's no belief in self-existence which is worth clinging to. Then the Buddha says, monks, you could rely on an opinion which, when relied upon, does not produce sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and anguish. Monks, do you see any opinion which, when relied upon, does not produce sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and anguish? And they say, certainly not, Bhante. The Buddha says, good, monks. Monks, I also do not see any opinion which, when relied upon, does not produce sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and anguish. So this also is touching on a theme which runs throughout the suttas, which is the importance of not holding to one's opinions. The importance of always being willing to let go of one's opinions. Recognizing that opinions are just opinions. And that our opinions are perhaps true from our perspective, but not true from another person's perspective. An opinion is dependent upon a particular set of experiences. Somebody else who has a different set of experiences will therefore have different opinions. So he speaks about the importance of being willing to relinquish one's opinions easily. Always open to the possibility that our opinions are wrong, and that there's another way of looking at things which may also be valid. Next, the Buddha goes into another approach, which to those who are familiar with the Anattā Sutta, this will all sound quite familiar. He says, monks, If a self existed, would there be the concept belongs to myself? In other words, if you actually had a self, would there be the possibility of owning things, possessing things? I'm going to say, yes, Bhante. He says, monks, if belongs to myself existed, would there be the concept myself? And they say, yes, Bhante. In other words, he says, these two are connected. So self and belonging to self are connected concepts. He says, monks, since one cannot arrive at self or belongs to self as true and reliable, then isn't the viewpoint the world is the self and after death I will be permanent, stable, eternal, unchanging, and remain that way forever, utterly and completely foolish? And the monks reply, how could it not be, Bhante? Bhante, it is utterly and completely foolish. If you know somebody who has this viewpoint, you can read this sutta to them, or at least this excerpt. They'll probably just get mad though. But who knows? They might have some awakening. It says, what do you think, monks? Is the body permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Bhante. Is that which is impermanent unsatisfying or satisfying? Unsatisfying, Bhante. Is it proper to regard that which is impermanent, unsatisfying, and changeable as this is mine, I am this is myself? Certainly not, Bhante. And he goes through the same thing with the other four components of existence. So feeling, recognition, mental formations, and consciousness. In each case, applying the same questioning. Is it permanent or impermanent? Satisfying or unsatisfying? If it's impermanent, unsatisfying, and changeable, is it proper to see it as myself? And they say, certainly not, Bhante. And he says, therefore, monks, any body, feeling, recognition, mental formations or consciousness, past, present, or future, internal or external, obvious or subtle, inferior or excellent, far or near, all should be accurately seen with correct wisdom in this way. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. So here he's prescribing the perception of not self in relation to the five components of being, the five khandhas. And he says, seeing in this way, monks, an educated disciple of the noble ones becomes disenchanted with the body, with feeling, with recognition, with mental formations, and with consciousness. Disenchantment produces dispassion. Dispassion liberates. This is actually one of my favorite short quotes in the suttas because it's actually a complete path to enlightenment in and of itself. Disenchantment produces dispassion. Dispassion liberates. That's it. Actually, I wish I could just end there because that would be a great way to end it. But there's more to the sutta. So we'll continue on with the sutta. When there is liberation, there is knowing liberated. One understands, birth is eliminated, the spiritual life has been completed, but what was to be done has been done. There will not be another existence like this. So this also is an important statement, in that the Buddha is saying that when one sees body and mind as not me, not mine, not myself, becomes disenchanted with all sankharas, experiences dispassion towards all sankharas, then one attains full enlightenment. And with full enlightenment, one knows that one has attained enlightenment. And that knowing is recognizing that there's nothing else which needs to be done. The path is complete. And because the path is complete, one will no longer be caught in the cycle of samsara. Then the Buddha says, where are we? I just lost them. Here we are. He says, monks, this is called a monk who has removed the barrier, who has filled in the moat, who has demolished the pillar, who has opened the lock, who is a noble being, who has lowered the banner, put down the burden, and is unbound. All of this is much more beautiful in Pali, by the way. So in translation, you lose the poetic flavor of what the Buddha is saying here. You just get the literal meaning, which is not quite as nice. He says, monks, how is he a monk who's removed the barrier? Ignorance has been abandoned by that monk. Its root has been cut up. It has been made like a palm stump, rendered non-existent, not subject to future arising. In this way, he is a monk who has removed the barrier. So the barrier then is a representation of ignorance. How is he a monk who is filled in the moat? Monks, wandering through birth from one state of existence to another, has been abandoned by that monk. Its root has been cut up, it has been made like a palm stump, rendered non-existent, not subject to future arising. In this way, he is a monk who is filled in the moat. I don't quite get how filled in the moat has to do with cutting off wandering from life to life. So if somebody else can explain that one to me, I'd be interested in hearing. Next, he says, how is he a monk who has demolished the pillar? Monk's craving has been abandoned by that monk. Its root has been cut up. It has been made like a palm stump, rendered non-existent, not subject to future arising. In this way, he is a monk who has demolished the pillar. So the pillar represents craving. So craving is what props up our experience of body-mind. It's what supports the experience of a suffering individual. It says, how is he a monk who has opened the lock? Monks, the 5 lower fetters have been abandoned by that monk. Their roots have been cut up. They've been made like a palm stump, rendered non-existent, not subject to future arising. In this way, he is a monk who has opened the lock. So in this case, lock is referring to the 5 lower fetters. So sensual desire, aversion, belief in self-existence, wrong grasp of spiritual practices, and doubt, skepticism. He says, monks, how is he a monk who is a noble being who has lowered the banner, put down the burden, and is unbound? Monks, the conceit I am has been abandoned by that monk. Its root has been cut up. It has been made like a palm stump, rendered non-existent, not subject to future arising. Monks, in this way, he is a monk who is a noble being who has lowered the banner, put down the burden, and is unbound. So in this case, the banner is representing the conceit of self-existence. So just like in a medieval battlefield, you would have the person waving the banner to show where your side was. It's like, our side is over here. You're waving the banner to show this is us. This is where we are. So in the same way, we're waving around our banner. This is me. I am this. I am this person. But the Arhat has put down the banner. They no longer need to talk about who they are. They no longer need to show off. They've put down the banner. They've put down the burden. So the sense of self, as much as we cherish and love it, it's a tremendous burden. It's a back-breaking burden. So we can put down that burden. And it's also what binds us. It's our biggest trap. It's our self-made cage. So when we put down the belief in self-existence, then we're finally free of those self-imposed limitations. And the Buddha says, we're almost done here, so bear with me. Realistically, this should have been a 2-part sutta, but it's not. It's 1 part, so bear with me. We've got a bit more to do. He says, when a monk's mind has been liberated in this way, then even an investigation by all the angels, including Indra, Brahma, and Prajapati, would not be able to ascertain. The consciousness of a Tathagata is dependent on that. In other words, even the most powerful beings in the universe could not find something which the consciousness of an awakened being is dependent upon. They could not say it's dependent upon that body, or upon those thoughts, or upon that perception, or upon that belief. They can't find anything that it's based upon. He says, monks, for what reason? I say that even here and now a Tathagata cannot be found. Even here and now a Tathagata cannot be found. So the Buddha is sitting right in front of them. And he's saying, even here and now, Tathagata cannot be found. So it reminds me of a story of Ajahn Chah. Somebody went to the monastery and asked, where is Ajahn Chah? And Ajahn Chah replied, there is no Ajahn Chah. So the Buddha is saying a Tathagata cannot be found. In other words, you can't define the Tathagata by anything that you can see. You cannot say the Tathagata is that body. You cannot say the Tathagata is that mind. You cannot say the Tathagata is anything at all. Because whatever you point to, you're just pointing to another temporary, impermanent sankhara, another insubstantial, ephemeral thing, which has no substance or existence of its own. That's not the Buddha. It's just another ephemeral sankhara. So you can't find the Tathagata. You can't point to anything and say that is the Buddha. And the Buddha says, but since I say this, some contemplatives and Brahmins slander me, inaccurately, vainly, falsely, and untruthfully, by saying, the contemplative Gautama leads people astray. He declares the destruction, removal, and annihilation of an existing being. Monks, since I am not that way and I do not speak that way, then it is inaccurate, vain, false, and untruthful. When those contemplatives and Brahmins slander me by saying the contemplative Gautama leads people astray, he declares the destruction, removal, and annihilation of an existing being. Monks, previously and currently, I declare only suffering and the cessation of suffering. This is another very important statement, which we find a few places in the suttas. So this is also in the Kachana Gota Sutta, which is in fact my favorite sutta in the entire Pali Canon. So the Buddha says, it is only suffering that arises and only suffering that ceases. So the Buddha says he speaks only about suffering and the cessation of suffering. So he's saying that some people claim that Buddhism is teaching the cessation of sentient beings, the cessation of self, the cessation of souls and spirits. And he's saying, no, that's totally wrong. Buddhism just teaches the cessation of suffering. That's all. And it is the misperception that there are selves and souls and spirits and beings. That misperception is just part of the massive suffering. So that misperception is what ceases. But there are no beings to cease. You cannot say that Buddhism teaches the cessation of beings because there are no beings in the first place. There is only the misperception of beings. And that's what ceases. This is actually the central point of the Diamond Sutra, the Vajracchedika Prajnaparamita Sutra. So then next it says, monks, even when others condemn, criticize, revile, and insult the Tathagata is not irritated, bothered, or dissatisfied. I wish I could be like that. That sounds great. People insult you and criticize you, and you're just like, no biggie. Says monks, even when others praise, honor, and revere the Tathagata is not delighted, elated, or overjoyed. That also sounds pretty admirable. So not to get puffed up or inflated when people praise us. So in either case, just to be equanimous. But it says, monks, when others praise, honor, and revere the Tathagata thinks, this is how I act towards what has been understood. In other words, the Buddha is recognizing people are praising me because I am a manifestation of the Dhamma. So what they're praising is the Dhamma. I also praise the Dhamma. I also appreciate the Dhamma. So naturally, these people are praising me because they're praising the same thing I praise, which is the Dhamma. And the realization of the highest manifestation of the Dhamma. He says, therefore, monks, if others condemn, criticize, revile, and insult you, you should not be irritated, bothered, or dissatisfied. Something to strive for. I'm working on it. If others praise, honor, and revere you, you should not be delighted, elated, or overjoyed. Monks, when others praise, honor, and revere you, you should think, this is how I act towards what has been understood. In other words, similarly, especially for those of us who are monastics, Dhamma teachers, sometimes we'll receive praise as a result of that. But people are not praising us, they're praising the Dhamma. We're simply a vessel through which the Dhamma appears. Kind of like if you're watching a movie and you really like the movie, you don't say like, oh, that projector screen, what a fabulous projector screen. No, you say, oh, that was a great movie. In the same way, a monk teaches the Dhamma. The monk is just the screen. It's the Dhamma that's magnificent. Next, the Buddha goes into yet another topic. This is one of those suttas where the Buddha keeps jumping topics every few sentences. He says, therefore, monks, abandon what is not yours. Abandoning it will be for your long-term benefit and happiness. This is another theme that we see in a few suttas, this theme of abandon what is not yours. He says, monks, what is not yours? Monks, the body is not yours. Abandon it. Abandoning it will be for your long-term benefit and happiness. Monks, feeling is not yours. Abandon it. Recognition, mental formations, consciousness is not yours. Abandon it. Abandoning it will be for your long-term benefit and happiness. So abandon it, by the way, doesn't mean to not take care of it. So abandoning the body doesn't mean that you stop feeding it and bathing it and taking medicine and so on. But rather it means not being disturbed or bothered by anything that happens to the body, because the body is not you in the first place. So he's talking about abandoning our sense of possessiveness and self-identity towards the body. So allowing the body to be what it is, which is a decaying mass of dirt and water. It's just part of the earth, that's all. And we just make a really big deal about it because we have this delusion that it is us or that it belongs to us. So abandon possessiveness and identity in relation to the body and mind. Then he gives a simile, another relatively well-known simile. He says, what do you think, monks? If people were to take or burn and do whatever they wished with all the grass and sticks and leaves and branches in Jeta's grove, would you think that people are taking us, burning us, doing whatever they wish to us? Certainly not, Bhante. For what reason? Bhante, because it is not ourself or belonging to ourself. And the Buddha says in exactly the same way, must abandon what is not yours, etc. So he's saying that we should see body and mind as just being like a bunch of sticks and leaves and grass that doesn't belong to us. Why would we be bothered about what happens to it? Then the final section of the sutta, some of you might have been waiting for this for about 20 minutes now, but yes, it is in fact almost over. Some of you might be wishing it was going for another hour. Ayasoma's nodding. We could, you know. I could just reread the sutta a couple of times. That would also be an option. So he says, monks, the Dhamma which has been well explained by me in this way is evident, apparent, manifest, and flawless. In other words, he's saying you can see these things for yourself. And there's absolutely no error to be found in anything that's been taught here. He says, monks, in this Dhamma, which has been well explained by me in this way, and which is evident, apparent, manifest, and flawless, there are monks who are arhants, who have eliminated their corruptions, who have lived completely, who have done what was to be done, who have put down the burden, who have reached the true goal, who have completely eliminated the fetter of existence, who are liberated through right knowledge. For them, there is no cycle of rebirth to be found. Monks, the Dhamma which has been well explained by me in this way is evident, apparent, manifest, and flawless. In other words, he's saying you can see people who have followed these instructions and attained awakening, full enlightenment. Then he says, monks, in this Dhamma, there are monks who have abandoned the 5 lower fetters. All of them will be reborn as angels and will attain full enlightenment in that state without returning from that world. This is non-returners. So the second highest stage of awakening. So where one has completely severed all attachment to physical existence, but is still not quite fully enlightened and still has a bit more to do. But that last bit of realization is done as a deva in a heavenly world. Then he says, monks, in this Dhamma, etc., there are monks who have abandoned 3 fetters and attenuated lust and hate. All of them are once returners, who will come to this world once more and put an end to their suffering. So people who, again, they've made very strong progress, but they need to have one more life as a human before they figure out the path to awakening. Then he says, monks in this Dhamma, there are monks who have abandoned 3 fetters. All of them are stream enterers, exempt from the lower realms, certain to reach full awakening. So stream enterers are people who they've abandoned identification with body and mind, skeptical doubt, and the wrong grasp of spiritual practices. So these are people who are certain to attain awakening, but it might take several lifetimes. In the suttas, it says it might take up to 7 lifetimes as a human or as a deva. Then he says, monks in this Dhamma, there are monks who are Dhamma followers, faith followers. All of them are certain to reach full awakening. So this is an interesting point. So in a few places in the suttas, we see mentioned Dhamma followers and faith followers, which are described as people who are not quite stream enterers, yet they are so solidly established on the path to awakening that they will eventually attain awakening. But it might not happen within 7 lifetimes, as with the stream enterer. It might take quite a bit longer than that. So there's not a lot of information about Dhamma followers and faith followers. So there's much speculation and debate as to what the Buddha was talking about there. But since the Dhamma is not learned for the sake of argument and debate, I'm going to stay out of that for the time being. Then he says, monks in this Dhamma, there are those who have faith in me and affection in me. All of them will reach heaven. So he's saying even just having faith in the Tathagata, faith in the Buddha and love for the Buddha, that may not lead to awakening, but it will at least lead to a positive rebirth, a pleasant rebirth. And the sutta ends, this is what the Blessed One said, satisfied, those monks delighted in the Blessed One's speech. So we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time, if you have questions or comments, please go ahead.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Bhante. And welcome to all the new friends joining in. And we have a couple of comments and questions. Liz has a comment. I'm not sure what it was in reference to, but I'll just read it and maybe you'll pick up or she'll explain. I heard the same thing described as indivisible consciousness, not having beginning or end or subject to dimensions of time and space.
I would have to know the context to which she said that in.
Yeah, so Liz, if you could explain what you were referring to, then we can probably flesh that out a little more. Gitanyana says, wonderful sutta. Melody Chua says, this sutta is similar to being, to what is said in the wondrous Lotus Dharma. I'm glad to find a refresher session here. And then in reference to the moat, a couple of people said, one person guessed that maybe because you can walk and then you can like fall into an empty moat and be hurt. But if it's filled, then there's safety. And then Jens asked, Bhante, can you speak a bit about the difference between opinion and right view? Right view points to liberation. Opinion only brings more suffering or reinforces the self? Question.
Yeah, I think what this is indicating is, so an opinion is where you don't actually have complete certainty of the truth of something, but you're treating it as though you do. So for example, if something goes missing and then you decide that, well, I think so-and-so stole it, and you act as though that's true. Maybe even convince yourself that it's true, but you don't realize that it's not actually necessarily for sure. And maybe later on you find out that the person didn't steal it, it just got put away in the wrong place. Or an opinion, like you have incomplete information and you just decide that something's true. A little while ago, I was talking to somebody and they just said, well, in my opinion, the coronavirus death counts are massively overinflated. And I'm like, well, that's your opinion. It's utterly absurd and ridiculous because all the experts disagree with you and you're not an expert. So you're probably wrong, but it's your opinion. So where did that person get their opinion from? Well, it doesn't really matter where they got it from. What's important is recognizing that they've come to a belief that something is true without any actual basis for that belief. So how that differentiates from right view, for example. So with right view, what we're doing is that we're studying the Buddha's teachings. We're developing an understanding of what's wholesome and unwholesome, what leads to awakening and what leads away from awakening. And we're taking that as a working hypothesis for how we live our life. And by taking it as a working hypothesis, we can come to an experiential understanding of the truth of those teachings. Then it shifts from just being an opinion about Dhamma to being an actual knowledge, an actual knowing. So that's the distinction that I would probably make between opinion and right view. Okay.
And then Robin asks, why can't something that is impermanent, unsatisfying, and changeable be regarded as a self? Is that the way we is it that the way we typically think about self is at odds with that?
Well, the truth is you can regard whatever you want as self. It's just that whatever you're regarding as self is impermanent, unsatisfying, and changeable. So the problem here is actually that whatever you label as self is gone within a short while. So then you have to label something else as self. And then that's gone. And then you have to label something else, and then that's gone. This is actually happening all the time with our body, for example. You think you have the same body today that you did yesterday? It's totally different. Completely different. According to modern physics, every single subatomic particle in your body has changed in the last 24 hours. Every single one of them. Quite literally, not a single part of your body is the same as it was yesterday. In other words, you think it's the same body, but it's actually a completely different body. So yesterday, you thought the body that you had yesterday was yourself, but clearly it wasn't. Today, you think this body is yourself, but clearly this isn't it either. Tomorrow, you're probably going to think that body is yourself, but that's clearly not it either. So in this way, something which is impermanent cannot be ourself. The sense of self seems to be independent of changeable things. Similarly, something that's unsatisfying. Well, if something is causing us pain and misery and torment, why would you want to identify that as yourself in the first place? Why would you choose to place your self-identity on something that was painful? Seems kind of silly, doesn't it? But it's also irrelevant because everything is impermanent anyway. And it's placing self-identity on changeable things that makes them unpleasant in the first place. Okay.
And Gita Jnana says, could filled in the moat mean that one is done with samsara and cause and effect, dependent origination?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Michael says, I like that the monk stuck to his guns in his wrong view. Had he not done that, had he pretended to change his mind, he wouldn't have received this valuable teaching. And Yen says, I understood filled in the moat as one who has developed understanding of the Dhamma to the extent that there are no more rebirths, that their knowledge is complete as a moat being completely filled.
So filling in the moat represents completion. Okay. And I'm thinking, so moat for me refers to the barrier around a castle which prevents entry. So it could also represent that one has filled in the moat, means that now one is finally able to enter the castle. So representing awakening. So you have the city or the castle, which is surrounded by a moat that keeps you out. So in the same way, wandering through samsara, driven by ignorance and craving, we're not allowed to enter the safe, joyful city. Filling in the moat means we've filled in that obstacle so that now we can enter. Okay.
And then their name is in, I think, the Russian alphabet, so I can't say it. But they say, as I understand it, Dhamma and Sada followers are bound to attain Sottapati fruit in that very life, maximum at the moment of death.
There's different theories on this, and the difficulty is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's extremely sparse information about them in the suttas. So the commentaries, of course, have run with it and said all kinds of things, but that's what the commentaries like to do, is to say all kinds of things. So yeah, again, there's debate as to what these two categories of beings are referring to. But as I said, I'm not going to go into that today. That's actually a whole subject in and of itself.
And then there's a comment from Melody that I'll just read, and perhaps you can comment where you see fit. The body of the suffering orbits are give and take to me currently experiencing. However, to me, it is due to the karma of suffering in music. We're always in our headphones, and it gets a little negative as this generation of suffering of music. I took off my headphones today on the way home from school, and I felt a load off my shoulder. For my case, it's karma suffering.
Too much thinking. Just feel your body all the time. And yeah, stop listening to music. Yeah, feel your body all the time. Okay. Anything else?
One more comment from Michael, who says, I think perhaps many opinions are based on what we want to be true.
Yeah. Often that's what it is. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, that was the last comment. A bunch of thank yous from everyone else. Liz never fleshed out what she was sharing before, so I guess maybe Friday for Monk Chat. But for everyone else, thanks for joining in, and thank you for all of your attention, comments, and questions. And you can join us tonight. We'll have Venerable Santi with us for his debut Dharma talk at Empty Cloud Monastery, and he'll be sharing about emptiness, always an attractive topic for Buddhist practitioners. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Enjoy the rest of your day.